Good afternoon. I would like to welcome you to Eastridge Presbyterian Church, and it has been a few years since we have seen each other in this way. I think it was 3 years ago with the re-release of Reviving Ophelia that Mary and her daughter Sarah were with us for the release of that book. My name is Melody Jones-Pointon, and I have the honor of serving here as the senior pastor. And I've said this all before, so if you've been here with us before, I apologize for the repeat information, but I was one of those young women for whom reading Reviving Ophelia changed my life. I was just leaving my teenage years, and I was working with young teenage women at the time. And understanding what was happening inside my brain and my heart and my body just really changed the way that I was able to adapt and think about the world around me. That was my first introduction to Mary Pipher and what reading her books could do for me. I have since devoured all of them. And after the last one, I admit to maybe feeling a sense of loss and sadness because I didn't know if there would be another one. So thankful, much to our delight, to find out that Mary is releasing another book, and this one is very timely for us in the living of these times. Reflections that will remind us of hope and light and love all around us, even at times when we might not see it. So I know you did not come here to hear me today, but all of this is important for us because I think that we have come here seeking the kind of honesty and open sharing that we are used to Mary giving us that helps us in our own lives to understand what's happening. So thank you, Mary, for releasing another book and for sharing with us this very timely guide for living in these days. Thank you all for coming. Mary Pipher.
It's great to see you here. Thank you for coming out on such a beautiful afternoon. I see so many friends and people I've known for a long time in this audience. It's very moving to me. This is my favorite place to speak in Lincoln with my friends and people around me. I also want to thank Melody and Donna for hosting us at this church, and Leslie of Francine Finch and her assistants, Pat and Kim, and my assistant today, Bev Jester, who came to just keep me company as I sign books. Let's see. Oh, I should mention one other person. My hands don't work very well anymore, and so I always get to a point in a book when my hands won't allow me to keep writing. And this time I was extraordinarily lucky to have the wonderful assistant, Sharon Kennedy. So she's not here today, but I thank her. This is a themed memoir. The themes are light and time. And it's really just a collection of stories about my literal and metaphorical relationship to light. I hadn't planned to write another book. After my daughter and I rewrote Reviving Ophelia, that was my 12th book, and I thought that's about a good place to stop. But what happened was, during the pandemic, I just didn't know what to do with myself. I was in a dark state mentally. I was home all the time. I didn't have contact with friends or family. I usually go swimming every day, and my rec center where I swim closed. And I realized very quickly into the pandemic that if I didn't have a reason to wake up in the morning and something meaningful to do, I probably wouldn't fare very well during the pandemic, however long it lasted. And of course, it lasted so much longer than we all thought it would. It's still here, actually. And another thing I realized was that at the time I wrote Women Roaring North, which isn't that long ago, only 3 or 4 years ago it came out, I was in a very light-filled part of my life. I had 5 grandchildren who were around all the time and was just having so much fun with them. Jim's, my husband's bands were playing all the time. It just was a really lovely, lucky life. But by the time I was in the pandemic, I was older, I had a few health problems. I was isolated from my friends and lonely. No more dancing, no more music at the zoo bar to hear. And my little grandchildren, the youngest ones, had moved to Canada, the border closed. And my other grandchildren, who I had never really considered the idea they'd grow up, they grew up. And they went to college and left. And it was like, oh no, how could you do that? I thought we had a deal going, that we'd stay around and play with each other for a long, long time. So I felt the need to write a book about those transcendent moments in my life and the ways I had rescued myself historically through dark times. And I also wanted to give the reader some ideas about how to find light in situations that don't look very light-filled at the beginning. So one of the things that's going for me in terms of this book is almost all of my memory is encoded in light. My first memory is actually, I was a baby lying on a blanket before I had words. And I was looking up through the leaves in a tree on my grandmother's front yard. And I remember the light and shadow dancing in these leaves. And I didn't encode it linguistically, but I have that picture still in my mind from that particular day. And so most of these stories, light is a central character, light and time, because at my age it's very impermanence, time passing, it's a very big topic. So I'll read you a few of these stories, and I don't know, let's see. I'm trying to think how long people want to sit in a building on a day like this. If there starts to be a lot of coughing and twitching, I'll stop. And then, I'm not going to ask your questions in here, but you're sure welcome to come through the book line if you have a question or want to say hello. So this first story is the first story in the book. When I was 5, my family was in a difficult situation. My father had signed up for the Army just as the United States entered the Korean War. He'd been home once in the 3 years since he had left in the fall of 1949. That's when I was 2. During that visit, my mother had become pregnant with my brother John, who had yet to meet his father. Occasionally, our dad sent us presents from Korea. I received a cocoa cup he had decorated with raindrops and a pink umbrella. He had carefully printed my name on the side, and at the bottom of the inside of the cup, as a joke, he had written, "Stop." He also sent me a doll and some bright Korean cloth. But really, we children had almost forgotten our father. My mother's name was Avis, the Latin root word for bird or soul. She was indeed soulful, although her singing voice was as croaky as a crow's. Our father was Frank, appropriately named because a more authentic and direct man did not exist. I was oldest of 3. My brother Jake was 1 year younger, and my brother John was a baby. Our mother was in her 3rd year of medical school and working long days. After putting us children to bed, she studied far into the night. In a picture of her from that time, she's holding Jake and me on her lap, showing us a picture book. Jake is wearing a shirt so small for him that his entire belly is exposed. I'm wearing a white t-shirt with the logo Fort Fitzsimmons Army Hospital. Mother is in a cotton house dress with a flowered kerchief tied around her head. Her face is thin and she looks exhausted. As her mother walked out the door early mornings, she would often say, "Be kind to each other." During the long days, we children were left with a series of housekeepers, none of whom could satisfy our mother's standards. She would deem the women she could afford to hire to be lazy or unclean and would soon fire them, only to hire another inept replacement. My brothers and I were free-range children, living on a dirt road in a tiny house in what was then the small suburb of Aurora, Colorado. From our relative stories, I ascertained that I was an early reader and that even as a toddler, I could fall asleep only if I had a magazine or a picture book to thumb. I liked to ride my tricycle on the cracked sidewalk and to play hide and seek with my brothers. Every night I waited on the stoop for my mother to come home, and when she did, I barnacled myself to her side until bedtime. Our mother was brave, unflappable, and endlessly patient, but her tasks were many and her free hours were few. When she was with us, she was loving and attentive. She liked to bake and sew. Once she made me a Lady Baltimore cake for my birthday. Sometimes she drove us into the mountains for picnics beside fast-moving clear streams. We would take off our shoes and wade into those cold waters, walking gingerly on the sharp rocks and slipping and falling into the water, only to be carried a few feet downstream by the current. Chilly fun for all of us. We could not afford amusements, and the polio epidemic kept us out of public parks and away from large gatherings. On Saturday evenings, we drove to the KOA radio station. We had discovered it by accident one night when our mother had taken us for a drive on the high plains to see the stars. Jake noticed a tall lit tower and asked if we could go see it. When we arrived, we discovered something much better than the tower. In front of the station was a large fountain illuminated by rotating colored lights of red, yellow, and blue. Our family would climb out of the car, sit on the warm hood of our Chevy, and watch the splashing colors change. I remember everything about this experience: the heat of the day still emanating from the car hood, the cool breeze from the mountains, the sagebrush smell of the air, and the glittery stars above. But it was the fountain that entranced me, the way the light danced in the cascades of water and spray flashing red, then blue, then yellow, and of course the rainbow hues in between as it turned from one color to the next. Dazzled by the sparkling colored lights, I forgot my missing father, my indifferent caregivers, my loneliness, and my restlessness. At the time, I didn't have words to explain my fascination, and I'm not sure I have those words now. But this light on water was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. I would stay focused on the fountain for a long time. Of course, my little brothers quickly grew bored and ran around the parking lot. Our mother retired to the driver's seat and dozed. She was an expert on catnaps and would take them all her life. Eventually, it would be time to climb back into the car for the ride home. I shut my eyes and would try to keep seeing those lights. Their beauty, the beauty of the light, soothed me and carried me away from my everyday life into something vast and universal. It still does. So this is a story that took place 3 or 4 years later. And in the interim, my father came home. He and my mother didn't get along very well. And he took my brother Jake and I to live in a trailer in the Ozarks behind his aunt's house. And that was a pretty rough year. I went a year without seeing my mother. And I didn't see my dad much either, because he was a pretty traumatized vet. And he was just gone a lot. But this is after our family was reunited. And it's a story about a visit I had to my grandparents, who were ranchers in eastern Colorado. It's called The Coffin and the Chenille Bedspread. Our family visited Mother's parents about once a month. Their house had 2 small bedrooms, a combination living and dining room, a mudroom, and a kitchen with a bathroom right beside it. Because Flagler was a quiet town of only a few hundred people, most of them friends of my grandparents, there were no locks on the doors. When grandfather was mucky from working in the garden or with cattle, he would leave his shoes and overalls in the mudroom, walk through the kitchen, and take a bath while conversing with my grandmother as she cooked dinner a few feet away. When we visited, my parents slept in the guest bedroom with my sister Tony. I slept on the couch, and my brothers slept beside me on the floor. I liked the closeness to my family, and especially to my grandmother, who was only 30 feet away. One day, my grandfather had an idea for a new sleeping arrangement. A neighbor had purchased a refrigerator and given my grandfather the large wooden box it was shipped in. He removed the long rectangular lid and cleaned up the container. He smoothed and varnished the wood and decided that, with a foam pad placed at the bottom to serve as a mattress, the inside of the box would be my new bed. When we arrived one summer morning, he proudly showed me his creation. My grandmother had already put bedding inside. It had been placed against the wall in my parents' bedroom, my least favorite room in the house. Its only window was small and faced north. The walls were dark green, and the heavy furniture was the color of burnt umber crayons. As I stood staring down into this bed, my grandfather examined my face for a happy reaction. I felt a tight ball of flame in my chest, and I had trouble breathing. I wanted to be polite, and I didn't want to hurt his feelings, but I knew I couldn't handle this coffin. I was terrified, and I blurted out, "I can't sleep in that." My grandfather left the room quickly without looking at me. I stood there struggling with two emotions. I knew I had been a bad girl, and I was frightened my mother would make me sleep in the box. Sure enough, my mother came into the dark room. We sat down on the bed, and she said, "Mary, you need to sleep in that. Your grandfather is so proud of it." I shook my head and said, "I won't do it." My mother's jaw tightened and her eyes narrowed. She looked at me and said, "Be a good girl now. This isn't like you." I explained to her I couldn't force myself into the coffin-like space. I didn't know the word claustrophobia, but I told her I would die if she made me sleep in that box. I didn't expect my words would move my mother, and they didn't. She had no tolerance for what she called neurosis. She dealt with people every day who were in physical pain, dying, or facing genuinely frightening experiences. Mental cases were not worthy of her attention. She said, "I want you to get in that bed now. Try it out, and you'll see it's fine." I had no choice. We didn't disobey our parents. I thought quickly about how I could survive doing what my mother asked. Finally, I turned away from her, shut my eyes, and stepped into the box. I hoped that if I didn't see where I was, I could manage. However, I knew exactly where I was. Even worse, I imagined myself underground with someone shutting the lid on me. I could almost hear the sound of dirt hitting the coffin's lid. My chest hurt and I couldn't breathe. I leapt out of that box like it was on fire. "I'll run away from home if you make me do this," I said. I looked at my mother, who seemed as mixed up as me. She didn't want to hurt my grandfather either. She was a good girl too. But in spite of her disdain for mental cases, she believed me at last. She said, "Go lie on your grandparents' bed for an hour and think about your behavior." My mother had no idea how relieved I was. I didn't mind thinking about what just happened. I wanted to understand it myself. She also didn't realize how much I liked my grandparents' bedroom. It was no bigger than the guest bedroom, but it had 2 windows and was filled with light from the east and south. The white chenille bedspread was luminous in the morning sunshine. I lay down and rubbed my cheeks against its nubby blessedness. I felt the warmth of the eastern sun and breathed in the fresh air that smelled of peaches. Suddenly I felt engulfed in bliss. The light, the bedspread, the breeze gently blowing the diaphanous white curtains. It was all holy to me, my relaxed body filled with warm white light. I don't know how long I remained in this exalted state. I remember I tried not to move because I didn't want it to disappear. At some point, my mother came in and broke the spell. She said, "It's lunchtime. Jake is going to sleep in your new bed. You owe your grandfather an apology." I stood up and shook myself off. I was waking from a trance, yet remnants of bliss flittered inside me. I floated to the kitchen and told my grandfather I was sorry. He cleared his throat and looked away, but he said, "It's all right. I don't want you to be unhappy." I truly was sorry, yet I was also proud. Usually my only thoughts were about pleasing others, doing the right thing, and not upsetting people. For once, I had stood up for myself. Jake passed me the coleslaw, my grandmother handed me a glass of buttermilk, and slowly I returned to the world of ordinary human interaction. I looked into the faces of everyone around the table and felt grateful to be included. My thoughts shifted ahead to a long afternoon of playing in the peach orchard and cooking with my grandmother. Let's see how I time this. Here's a little story. We lived in Dorchester first, and then we moved to Beaver City, Nebraska, which is out by Norton, Kansas, right on the Kansas-Nebraska border. And this story is called Prairie Dog Villages. Show me a village and I'll show you the world, Tolstoy wrote. Beaver City was my world, and I was old enough to navigate it on my own. I had a best friend, a pack of neighborhood kids, access to the small downtown, and to my mother's clinic. I could have my pick of adults and children to enjoy. Alvin Rogers was our school's janitor and the bounty hunter who sold us baby coyotes. This is in another story. Every year we'd go over to Alvin Rogers' house next door, and he would collect coyotes for bounty, $2 a pair. And the first year, my brothers and I were so upset that our mother gave us each $2 and said we could pick out a coyote. And from then on, we raised a coyote every summer. And then in the winter, we'd take a pound of hamburger down to the Beaver Creek and release our coyotes so they could hopefully make it through the winter. Spike and Mike visited their father in the state penitentiary once a month. Rex was the banker's son, although the only evidence of wealth in the family was a window air conditioner. His mother had asthma, and his dad could afford this luxury. Not all diversity was tolerated. Racism and anti-Semitism were rampant. Native Americans were a target of vitriol. People of color would have had trouble in our town, not from everyone, but some. Homosexuals were viewed as outsiders. The crippled son of the local pharmacist was gay. He once made the terrible mistake of trying to kiss a boy in his class. After that, he was teased mercilessly for the rest of his school years. With limited news of the world, our universe was one another. Children played and attended school and Sunday school. Adults had church, supper clubs, reunions, and coffees. Conversation was an art form, and good storytellers and joke tellers were highly prized. My friends and I had freedom. In the summer, we left our home in the morning and returned only for meals. We biked wherever we wanted to go. This wasn't always so easy. Large packs of roaming dogs sometimes followed us, barking aggressively and nipping at our feet. Around such dogs, we lifted our feet onto the handlebars. One hot July afternoon, Jeannie, that's my best friend, and I formed a girl posse and biked to the next town to see what kind of popsicles were in their grocery store. We weren't good planners, and on the hot asphalt with no water supply, we quickly lost our enthusiasm. But we pedaled on. In Arapahoe, we found a water fountain and rehydrated, then went to sample popsicles. On the way home, with the sun even hotter and too tired to proceed, we stopped a few miles short of town. A man came along with an empty truck and carried us in. Sometimes after dinner, my parents drove us to visit the Prairie Dog Village. This was an enormous sandy area, several blocks long and almost as wide. It was dotted with burrows that formed an underground city with food storage units, nurseries, and workstations. The prairie dogs were continually repairing their tunnels. On the surface, we could see hundreds of furry little dogs standing on their hind legs, chattering, chasing each other, or scouting for snakes and black-footed ferrets. Rattlesnakes and red-tailed hawks dwelled all around and feasted on them daily. My brothers Tony and I would sit on the hood and watch the ongoing spectacle of prairie dogs at work and play. The sky was enormous in that place and time. As the sun turned from lemon to gold to orange to red, the shadows lengthened on the entrances to the burrows. By the time the sun touched the horizon, all the dogs would be in bed. We often stayed after the sun went down. The afterglow of sunset was the best part, the pink and apricot clouds, the light just touching the tops of the soft blue hills, the coolness exhaling from the earth, and the first stars blinking on. Our natural ecosystem was still rich, and we took it for granted that we would always have a healthy, sustainable planet. The land around us was filled with birds, insects, and mammals. It was easy to catch all kinds of fish in the creeks and ponds. In the spring, we caught tadpoles in the ditches. In those days before factory farming and industrial agriculture, I didn't know the fresh, clean place I lived would turn into a county of hog farms that pollute the water and stink up the air. I thought the prairie dogs and all the other beautiful animals, fish, insects, and birds would be there forever. Now they have been almost entirely eradicated. I hope their populations are restored. I would like my great-grandchildren to be able to watch prairie dogs at sunset. Let's see. I'm going to read one. After I became a speaker, I did a lot of traveling internationally and speaking in foreign countries. And this is about a trip to Okinawa. And Okinawa, I think you'll know from this story, but my father was a medic in Okinawa during World War II. And that was one of the most bitterly fought battles of Second World War. In 1995, I was invited to work in Okinawa. This was just after the armed services had resolved to fully integrate women into their ranks. The Navy needed gender education, and I was selected to be its speaker. The military gives people a rank so it knows where to put them in the hierarchy. I can't remember my rank, but it was high, and Jim and I were given the general's guest house. This was a spacious four-room apartment with leather-bound books, a fully stocked bar, and elegant furniture. During my time on this island, almost everything I saw reminded me of my father. 50 years earlier, he had been here as a Navy medic with the invading force whose mission was to dislodge Japanese troops. In the mid-1940s, Okinawa had been a steamy place with almost impenetrable jungles. The only way to move forward was to hack through the roots and vines, always alert for landmines, ambushes, and poisonous snakes, mostly colored the green of the vegetation. The Japanese had burrowed into caves underground and were determined to hold on, even if it meant the death of all. The battle for territory was fought foot by foot, with many Americans dying from surprise attacks, aerial bombardment, and hand-to-hand combat. Through it all, my father ran from man to man with a stretcher and an emergency medical kit. He didn't carry a gun, and the Japanese troops did not spare the medics. Dad picked up men with faces torn off or limbs shattered, dodging bullets as he hauled the injured to medical tents. He must have seen 1,000 deaths or more, including those of many of his friends. He witnessed people stabbing each other with bayonets and men who had been blown apart. At the time, he was not living in the general's quarters. He was a grunt, sleeping in a tent on the sand or in a small clearing in the jungle. He was covered in insect bites, always hot, and unable to shower or relax. When he wrote my mother, he never mentioned the death, trauma, or the constant risk of being wounded or killed. Instead, he wrote, "The food is terrible, but fortunately the water is even worse." Jim and I dined in the officers' mess, where we were offered fine wine and fresh-caught fish. We were given tours of the island. Under a light blue sky, dark waves rolled onto white sand. Ribbons of orchids cascaded down the side of waterfalls. The hills were covered with stone graves that looked like turtle shells. During the battle for Okinawa, 200,000 people died, including 1/4 of all Okinawans. We visited a center by the sea that Pearl S. Buck had founded to promote American-Asian friendship after the war. Now a silver-haired American octogenarian dressed in a kimono was in charge. She offered us tea and then took us to see the nearby cliffs. Pointing to the sharp rocks below, she said that when the Americans arrived, this was where many Okinawans jumped to their deaths. The Japanese had told them that Americans were monsters who would torture and kill them all. As I stood by this serene woman in this peaceful place, I could hardly take in all the suffering that had happened here. Our last gift from the military was a cottage on a private beach where officers took their vacations. We snorkeled in the East China Sea and walked through the orchid-filled gardens. At night, Jim and I sat on the beach and watched the sunset over what was, for us, a new ocean. When the stars emerged, the few constellations that we recognized were upside down. We focused on Canopus, the great star of the south, and on Sirius, the dog star we knew from home. Our father was in his early 20s when he signed up for the war. At his age, I was in college. During the war, he'd been self-sacrificing and courageous, yet he never shared a feast with officers, stayed in a beach house, or snorkeled with 100 kinds of colorful fish. Now his daughter, through many strokes of good fortune, was here too. We each had our destinies. His life was short and filled with events I can hardly imagine. Fate has been much kinder to me. Luck is not evenly distributed. There is not always a connection between effort and reward. Some heroes go unsung. My father's willingness to give his young life, to run through bullets and jungles, to rescue others, is one definition of heroic. Every night on that beach, 7,000 miles away from his home and mine, I thought of my father. He had been so angry at my brothers and me for opposing the Vietnam War. Our marching against the war must have felt like a betrayal. He'd been willing to fight for his country. He'd sacrificed so much and been scarred emotionally. Then his children sang Pete Seeger's Steady War No More. My father did the best he could, just as we all do. One definition of adulthood is that we can see our parents as people, independent of their relationships with us. Looking at the night sky, I could see Frank, not as my father, but as a person who, like all of us, was caught in the tides of his times. I think I'll read one more, and since I see quite a few of my musician friends here, I think I'll read the Fab Tones Last Night at the Zoo Bar. The Fab Tones is one of my husband's bands. I changed the names in this. I didn't know who would want to be mentioned by name. On New Year's Eve, 1999, my husband's band played for all their friends at an event space called The Loft. That night, everyone filled the dance floor. We were middle-aged in the midst of busy lives and relatively untouched by fears for the future. We boogied to Good Rockin' Daddy, Wild Nights, and Pretty Women. We embraced one another and formed conga lines around the room. By then, the Fab Tones had been together for 15 years, and they had built a community of friends and fans. At midnight, we toasted the new millennia with champagne. New Year's Eve 2019, the Fab Tones hosted another gathering for 140 of their friends. But this time, the party was to say farewell. The crowd was mostly the same people, but we had greatly changed. Our hair was gray or silver, our faces had wrinkles and lines, and we weren't as spry as we had been. Many of us had retired, and our children had grown up and moved on to their adult lives. Nowadays, we visited doctors' offices more than we danced. I boogied with Twyla, who had lost her husband the year before, and with Jill, who I'd known for 45 years. When I met Jill, she was a pretty vibrant student nurse dating Reynold, the drummer in a band with Jim. Jill was still pretty, but she had retired from nursing, and now she and Reynold owned a lake cabin. Wallace Stegner wrote, "We thought we were going to leave our mark on the world, and instead the world left marks on us." Most of us were pretty marked up. Laura, the vibrant owner of a local bookstore, had multiple sclerosis, and Sam had late-stage Parkinson's. Roger, John, and Tom had died. Frank and Quinn had lost their life partners. Eric's wife of 30 years left him last Christmas, and he hadn't spoken to his son since then. Donna's son was in alcohol treatment. However, most of us were content. Our children, if we had them, were launched. Some of us were lucky enough to be grandparents. All almost all of us were still dancing with the people who brought us to the party. Walt and Kay were in a bluegrass band, and Cora had taken up watercolor. Ray was playing music and enjoying a new job teaching. And we were at a party with champagne, neon lights over the bar, and a great dance band. Sally, in her wheelchair, waved her arms and twisted her body to music. I danced to Monkey Time, Chain of Fools, and Giving It Up for Your Love. I was moving among my friends for joy and to fend off my grief that the 35-year-old era of the Fab Tones was ending. I would never hear that band play these songs again, and most likely I'd never be in a room dancing with this big group of friends. On stage, the band was pulling out all the stops. John's sax solos were ornate and showy, and when he stepped to the front of the stage, his instrument lit up with Christmas lights. Reynolds knocked us out when he sang Domino and Brown Eyed Girl. Nobody but Van Morrison could match him. Pam belted out a raucous version of Empty Bed Blues and poured her heart into Crazy. Steve played his virtuoso guitar, and Jim backed it all up with his steady bass. Such wonderful music. How could they let this end? But the musicians weren't ending this era, time was. After multiple health problems, John felt he could no longer handle the practice required to keep up his chops. Steve now vacationed in Florida 3 months a year. The dance clubs, which had been the bread and butter of this band's circuit, were closing down. The Fab Tones' time was up. All evening, I felt a mixture of joy and sorrow. I loved dancing and singing along to my old favorites. However, I was witnessing the end of an era in a wild and wise community. I would see most of my friends again, but not at a dance party. My children were middle-aged now, and my oldest granddaughter was in college. My hands didn't work well, and my eyes weren't good, and I could no longer carry a pack up a mountain. But I was happy, and the people on the dance floor and stage had played a large role in that. All these many years, we had been intertwined as prairie grasses, living together for the new green spring, scorching summers, brightly colored autumns, and snowy winters. We had faced all kinds of weather together, and no doubt we would face more. However, this night, we swirled to Moon Dance and Mercy, Mercy Me. We stretched it out with Memphis in the meantime. We shouted I love you to one another across the crowded dance floor. The band ended the night with Guy Clark's Old Friends. We all sang along to the chorus. We lifted our champagne glasses for one last toast. We hugged each other. Then the neon lights blinked on and off. It was closing time. We walked into the dark and cold of New Year's 2020. We had no idea of the harsh weather we would soon face. So let me see what time it is. I think it's time to stop. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. The one thing I'd like to say to you is I hope you can all look back over your lives and construct your own light in life. I think you can. So thank you. I'll see you outside at the book table. Thank you.